Crime Stands Still. One season, one story by Marjorie Orbin. The podcast that delves deeply into true crime stories post-conviction, resolving cases, bringing you new evidence, fresh perspective, and revisionist theories, the whole truth and not just what the jury heard. Giving voice to the voiceless is my passion and the inspiration behind this new Just Us project. I'm a criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, and multi-published award-winning true crime author. I'm also a national speaker and expert in criminal pathology. Crime Stands Still retells what happened from why through reenactments, verbatim testimony, transcripts, audio recordings, and first-hand journal compositions, bringing you different voices and points of view, the suspects and others that you won't find on any other podcast. Subscribe, listen, and download for free from your preferred podcast app on Apple or Android devices. Original score, sound design, and mixing by composer and drummer Marjorie Orbin. Season 1, Firefly, Episode 1, Wiziati. It's October 2004 in Scottsdale, Arizona, somewhere near Tatum and Dynamite. The scene is serene, full of vibrant bougainvillea bushes cascading over walls and fences, carefully manicured golf courses backlit by soft hills, towering saguaro, mesquite, palo verde trees. Desert wildflowers had a lovely peppery smell, and a recent rain had left small puddles that now glistened in the sunlight. Transient Robert Aim called 911. He said he'd found a blue tub he believed contained a human torso. A man's body from the chest down, he said. He knew it was a human because of the belly button. The body, clothed in a pair of bloody denim shorts, held up with a brown leather belt, was stewing in blood, bone chips, hair, debris, and other bodily fluids. Bordering the tub was a barbed wire fence with a large gap wide enough for a vehicle to pass through. A dirt road cut diagonally across the southwest corner of the intersection. At the entrance, a small sign read State Trust Land, No Trespassing. The vacant desert parcel was blocked on both sides by housing developments, tract homes built uniformly in various shades of beige. Where was the rest of him? The plastic tub had been dumped about 50 feet from the street, north of a widened area in the dirt road that was just large enough for a vehicle to turn around. On the ground, there were faint traces of weathered tire tracks, but by the time investigators arrived, the tracks were too eroded to identify anything about the vehicle that had been used to dump the body, or so they said. A few hundred feet from the torso, clear sheets of crumpled plastic were found tangled in the desert shrubs. The 50-gallon plastic tub was covered by a dingy white futon mattress and a tan section of carpet visible from the roadway. Homicide Detective Dave Barnes, an 11-year veteran of the Phoenix Police Department, said he immediately thought of satanic ritual, a signature mob hit, possibly a drug deal gone bad. Inside the tub, he saw a coiled-up orange electrical cord on top of the body, packing tape stuck to the lid, a 3-inch piece of jagged glass, plastic sheeting wet with bodily fluids, and, at the bottom of the tub, a spent .38 caliber bullet. But there was no bullet wound on the torso. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy removed contact lens solution, $400 in cash, and a set of keys from the victim's jeans front pocket. Nothing that would identify the victim's remains. In the medical examiner's opinion, the body had been frozen for an extensive period of time, then thawed, hacked into pieces by a person he described as a cold-blooded butcher who used an electric saw to slice through the corpse with chilling precision. Whoever did this, he testified, was no amateur, no lunatic who went berserk with an axe. He said bone dust in the wounds indicated dismemberment. No lungs, no heart, liver, spleen, kidneys. Cut marks on the victim's vertebrae and right and left tibia were consistent with having been made by a skill jigsaw, a kind of reciprocating saw that moved up and down like a sewing machine or a hunting knife, possibly even a skinning blade, the kind used to take the hide off an animal. The smell of death lingered for days, so much so that Barnes could smell it on his clothes, hair, shoes, and belt. Other detectives were also nauseated. In fact, they made him move the evidence to the basement of the homicide impound lot. And as Barnes hung up the wet plastic sheeting, he learned a fellow detective, Jan Butcher, had been working a perplexing missing persons investigation. But what kind of person cuts up a body? It was a question that haunted me, particularly given Arizona's macabre history of having had 2 and now 3 so-called torso murders. There was Winnie Ruth Judd in the 1930s, a medical secretary who was accused and ultimately sentenced to death for chopping up her friends and putting them into a suitcase. Then there was Valerie Pape, accused of killing her husband and dumping his headless, armless, legless torso into the trash in the early 2000s. And of course, we can't forget the infamous serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer and Dennis Nielsen, who kept their victims' bodies and body parts in their refrigerators. Psychiatrist Willem Martens, who studied these kinds of killers, said that they were deeply lonely, alienated, insecure. They had high risk factors for violence, often tormented by some kind of hidden suffering, like divorce or loss or self-dissatisfaction. These hardly described my client, Marjorie Orbin, now serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison in Arizona. She'd been in for more than 20 years. And when I first met her in person, I was struck by 2 things. She was beautiful, even in her orange institutional garb, and also demure, modest, almost shy. She had warm brown eyes that teared up often as we discussed what happened.
I didn't kill Jay. I loved him. He was my son Noah's father. The two were very, very close. Noah idolized him, had pictures of him everywhere. We had pictures of him everywhere. We were a family.
She told me she'd written to her son every day for the first few years of her incarceration, even before she was convicted. 365 letters a year, trying to stay positive, pouring her heart out to the one true love of her life. She teared up as she recalled this and learned years later that her son had never received them, never opened them, not one. They'd been intercepted, hidden from him, destroyed.
He was truly one of the kindest men I'd ever met, a Boy Scout, and we loved each other, but I wouldn't say I was in love with Jay. We had a great friendship, an understanding that I would only give up my life as a Las Vegas showgirl and move to Phoenix if we could pursue fertility treatments together. Physically, Jay couldn't perform. He had an unusually small penis and was afraid he might have a problem making a baby. We made quite a pair. All I ever wanted was a child. That's it. But when doctors warned me at 18 that my chronic endometriosis probably meant I never would, I vowed to live my best life for me, make my own mark, earn my own way. I didn't need a man, especially if he couldn't give me a child. Maybe that sounds selfish, but it was true. Geez, I'd been married and divorced 7 times with nothing to show for it except heartbreak and debt, going from man to man looking to make a baby so I could fill the emptiness inside of me. Marjorie Crow Marquis Tweedwood Canizzaro Mottram Rodescits didn't make the best choices in men. After all, I'd been a Las Vegas showgirl since I was 17. dancing with Michael J. Peters' famous platinum dolls, strutting on stage in glittering sequined gowns and bikinis I'd designed, invoking Cher and Tina Turner. I choreographed most numbers, studying and incorporating moves I'd learned from watching Star Search on television. I opened at the Stardust, traveling and performing in Atlantic City, at Taj Mahal, Texas, Florida, New York. On stage, I felt like a star, a firefly. I kept Marjorie Marquis as my stage name. She was larger than life, literally, on bus billboards all over Las Vegas. Jay was always there, waiting for me, like a wingman. Not in a creepy way, but in a loving, supportive way. He wasn't my type. Bald, heavy, dressed in cowboy clothes, large diamond pinky rings on both hands. Though he looked like a used car salesman, he was charming, magnetic, and funny. He made me laugh. We had the best conversations, talking for hours after shows, sometimes about my failed love life, how I'd left a trail of abusive, explosive men who mostly wanted to exploit me, so much so that on my 33rd birthday, Jay proposed. Another marriage. But this was different. Jay was different. For starters, he didn't hurt me. He wanted to help me, help us make a baby. I agreed to marry him if and when I got pregnant. We said 2 years. We were fiercely committed to each other and to pooling our resources into making a baby, bonding in battle. We were a force. Who knew it would be so difficult and expensive to conceive? Surgeries, injections, tests, and failures and heartbreak. After 1 year, we eloped in Las Vegas at a cute little chapel and had a quiet, simple ceremony. When I finally got pregnant, Jay treated me as if I were made of glass. We were ecstatic to be parents. Those were the happiest days of my life, truly. We named our son Noah, even before he was born. The name fit. After all, he saved me, saved our family. Why did Jay and I divorce? Because of an IRS tax lien. One of my ex-husbands owned an excavating company, which, over my strong objections, he put in my name, calling it a woman's business enterprise, so he didn't have to pay taxes. I didn't like it. It felt shady, dishonest. And he didn't like me resisting, so he threw me down a flight of stairs, leaving me unconscious in a locked basement. I'm sure he hoped he'd killed me, but instead, I divorced him, signed everything back over to him, all of his assets, debts, everything. The only thing I kept was my Ford Bronco. No loose ends. Or so I thought. Until one day, while trying to pick up a pregnancy prescription at the pharmacy, my bank card declined, and I learned that the IRS had seized my account, all $19,000. Jay worried the IRS might audit his business, Jayhawk International, and so we made the difficult decision to divorce shortly after we'd married. For his own protection, Jay put no assets in my name. We always planned to remarry after signing a prenup, but it wasn't so simple. Arizona had community property laws, and it was just too risky for Jay. But he did draw up a will, twice, once while we were married and once after we divorced. He wanted to make sure Noah and I would always be taken care of, no matter what. Even if we couldn't legally be married, we lived as if we were married, devoted to raising Noah together in quiet, middle-class suburbia. Jay sold his jewelry and Native American art. He rented a warehouse in Phoenix, bought a large white cargo van, and became a wholesale dealer for manufacturers and retailers. He spent most of his time on the road, away from me, away from Noah. But he always checked in with me every day. I didn't need a physical relationship. I'd had enough sex by then for 100 people. I never strayed, never even considered it. Nothing was worth losing my family over. Nothing. But there's a saying about fireflies. Pretty little twinkly creatures. Contain them in a jar, and pretty soon all you'll have left are big, black bugs. We met at LA Fitness in July 2004. I'd gained a lot of weight after the fertility drugs and was anxious to lose it. Jay had offered to pay for liposuction, but it was expensive and unnecessary, and I thought I could do it on my own with diet and exercise. After a few months, I started seeing results, and so I continued my routine. Mostly, I walked around with a headset, not interacting with anyone, always wearing my wedding ring so no one would bother me. But then, one day, I noticed Larry. Attractive, tall, blonde, striking blue eyes. He was a little older than me, looked like a professional bodybuilder. He was huge. He initiated the small talk, the flattering comments, said I was in great shape, an impressive mom with an amazing work ethic. He'd seen me in the aerobics room working with Noah on his karate moves. He said I had a beautiful little girl, which naturally made me laugh since Noah was obviously a boy. We began working out together. He knew a lot about weightlifting, and I was eager to learn.
At 6 feet, 230 pounds, Larry could deadlift 225 pounds, bench press 200. He was big enough and strong enough to move a body, but in court, wearing a sweater and glasses, looking pasty-faced, he couldn't lift an empty 50-gallon Rubbermaid plastic tub.
We talked for hours on the phone.
He'd bragged to Marjorie that he was a former member of the sheriff's posse in the reserve force, a self-proclaimed certified police officer in the state of Arizona. He'd gone through the academy and received training to carry a weapon, but insisted he knew nothing about firearms. Turns out he was deputized as a Maricopa County sheriff's officer, but lasted only 3 months in the academy.
Larry was a constant in my days. Bought lunch for me, kept me company at the warehouse when Jay was out of town, said he didn't like me being alone in that industrial area at night in the dark. On weekends, he took Noah and me out places. We were just friends, but an emotional relationship was developing. Noah knew him as Mommy's friend from the gym. Larry played with him, wrestled, and roughhoused with him. He cooked us dinner, took us to the movies, hiking. I was falling in love with him. He did and said all the right things, and he loved my son. In June, after Jay and Noah left town on a fishing trip, I finally told Larry I was actually divorced.
She approached me first in the gym, flirting with me, handing me her phone number and telling me to call her. She knew Jay's travel itinerary, knew when he was coming home and when it was safe for me to drop by. Before I did anything, I made her show me her divorce papers. Morally, I just couldn't date a married woman.
By September 2004, we'd been dating for 3 months and were beginning to discuss having a more long-lasting relationship when I found out he lied about his age and was actually 10 years older. We talked about buying a house together. I wanted everything to happen as kindly as possible. I loved Jay, but I was in love with Larry. I thought he was wonderful.
Larry was a loner. He was a narcissistic loner. It's an interesting personality type. Let me talk. I know the man's personality. And Larry is a man you don't confront. I mean, and
why is that?
Because he's like confronting a 10-pound hungry rat in a corner, because he's going to come back at you. That was his nature. He had an aggressive, a kind of repressed, aggressive nature that even when I dealt with him on business levels, I mean, you know, I could deal with him authoritatively, but you had to kind of be careful on how you handled him, because he was always very defensive. And Larry's the kind of guy you don't want to put his back against the wall and stand in front of him, because he's gonna take you out. I mean, he's gonna come at you with whatever he's got. Aggressive, passive-aggressive kind of nature.
Why did it matter what Larry was? Because people with narcissistic personalities learn early on that perception is more important than reality. So they develop traits and qualities others see, rather than focusing on any substantive inner self-development. Charm and charisma are hypnotic. This is how they lure their prey, by being superficially impressive. They are showmen. But by the time their unsuspecting partner awakens from their spell to the neglect and emptiness of the relationship, it's often too late. They're too invested, too controlled. The shimmer has dulled on the coin. But the victims stay anyway, committed to protecting their partners, while destroying themselves in the process.
I guess I did lie about my age. I was actually 60. She was pretty. Neighbors called her Barbie, if that's any indication. She was fit, muscular, toned, could bench press 140 pounds. But I was more of a lower body person, so that didn't really impress me. Did I make a lot of money? I worked as a production manager at a printing company and supervised a dozen employees. I was more concerned with her ambitions, or lack of. Her little Noah was getting up there in age, and I was concerned about her future plans for her life, you know? She wanted to be a soccer mom. That worried me. I mean, if she expected our relationship to blossom or whatever, you know, she had to want to be something other than just a soccer mom. I mean, I didn't want my lady at home doing nothing. I didn't approve of her just lying around the house.
Larry had an intensity about him. He sent me love notes, lots of them, called me his baby girl. And if I'm being honest, I liked the attention. Maybe a little too much. I wrote him love notes. Dearest Larry, I love you. I love waking up next to you, you hot sex toy.
These were used against her at trial, because she'd written them in October, after Jay's disappearance, after Larry's lawyer advised him to cease all contact with Marjorie. I asked her how it all began. Even though I was her post-conviction lawyer and already had access to 10 months of trial testimony, over 75,000 pages of discovery, and had reviewed at least 1,000 exhibits in the evidence locker, I wanted to hear it from her. What happened? She'd written extensive journal entries, had recorded her story in countless videos she'd made for 48 hours that never aired, and it was as if she'd relived that moment in time over and over like a stuck record.
It all started with Jay's trip to Florida, September 8th, 2004, his 45th birthday. I hadn't planned any kind of celebration for him because Noah and I were both homesick with strep throat, and Jay was supposed to be gone nearly 3 weeks on one of his biannual southern-northern back trips. He cut the trip short because of Hurricane Francis, called me from Tucson, said he'd be coming home for a couple of days to regroup. But we were sick. Jay couldn't afford to get sick. If he missed even one day, his sales would never recover. In the past, if we were sick, he'd sleep on the couch or at the warehouse or stay away. So that's what he did this time, stayed away. His was a risky business full of shady characters. His brother had given him his .357 revolver, but still, how lucky can a person be? The constant traveling on the road. What if he had mechanical problems, brake failure, and he suddenly veered off a cliff?
It was something Jay worried about too, not to mention the thousands of dollars in cash, jewelry, and artifacts he carried in his van.
He had insurance policies on everything, his vehicles, his buildings, his life.
In fact, Jay had 2 separate life insurance policies, neither of which actually favored Marjorie. One named Jay's longtime friend and business associate, Marshall Rusin, as the beneficiary. Rusin knew about Jay's note to Marjorie, the one that contained explicit instructions in the event he was robbed or had an accident.
Marjorie, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I'm sorry, dear. Just remember you were the love of my life, and Noah, you are the best thing I have ever done. I will love you both always, and thank you both for all you've given my life. Information you may need, and please, no open casket for me.
Over the years, Jay had given his friends instructions too, and had even updated his will in the spring of 2004, asking his brother Jake if he'd serve as Noah's guardian in case something happened to him. Something did happen to Jay, and in time, following Jay's instructions, made Marjorie an unwitting suspect in his disappearance. It wasn't like Jay to go silent. He always checked in. Marjorie and Noah left multiple unanswered voice messages for him. Business calls from customers also went to voicemail. Friends and family were now frantic. His brother Jake hired a private investigator and even consulted a psychic. Jay's body, the psychic ominously predicted, would be found near his cargo van in a wooded area near Flagstaff. On September 9th, Marjorie shopped for cleaning supplies. Mops, scrub brushes, buckets, a garden hose, 4 bottles of Tilex, Clorox bleach, liquid plumber, and several pairs of men's boxers and briefs. She made trips to Lowe's and bought 2 blue Rubbermaid tubs with gray lids, trash bags, a Swiffer wet jet, Pine Sol, and acetone. She purchased trash cans and bath towels, sanding blocks, paint trays, chip fix kicks, a caulking gun, lavender scents, plants, a jump starter, sunshade, and a folding ramp. It was a list the prosecution found particularly damning.
Marjorie was a person who did a lot of projects and construction around the house, fixed things and built things. I was there when there was an island in the kitchen, and she literally moved it, took it apart, disassembled it from the floor, moved it several feet, retiled the floor. She installed a sink, a new countertop. It would require drilling a hole in a solid piece of wood.
People called me a female Tim Allen. Painting projects, home improvement, fixing things. Once I designed and sewed all new uniforms for my son's karate class. I built his nursery and all of the cabinets in Jayhawk International. I was super organized. Everything had its place. In plastic bins, like the ones Jay used to store his artifacts. Christmas decorations, Halloween, craft projects, hair extensions.
Turns out Larry, too, was quite the handyman, especially with a chainsaw. In fact, Larry and Marjorie frequently went to Home Depot and Lowe's together to purchase items for home improvement projects. He had his own detached shed in the back of his home and a standalone garage where he kept sheets of plastic, duct tape, razor blades, orange extension cords, throwing knives, and a 6-foot-long futon mattress, exactly the items found with the tub and Jay's torso. And when police later searched his shed, Larry asked them if they planned to arrest him. But before police could, Larry demolished the shed, destroying all the evidence with it. Following Jay's disappearance, Marjorie continued to use Jay's credit cards, as she always had. But once DNA confirmed the torso was in fact Jay, police wanted to know how. His credit card, which he used on September 8th, came into her possession on September 9th, just one day after police confirmed that he'd gone missing. They suggested Larry had slipped it into her purse, perhaps trying to set her up. Maybe he was jealous, using her, making her a scapegoat. After all, they'd only known each other 3 months.
He's up.
This is how her interview went. Seated in a cold, dimly lit room in the police department at a metal institutional table. Marjorie hadn't seen Noah in a while. He'd been taken to child help, and she was worried about him. She asked repeatedly when she'd be able to see him. Detective Barnes continued to refocus her on the credit cards.
I use Jay's cards all the time. I don't understand. It's not unusual. I don't know. This is a trick. This is a trick. You tricked me. I didn't do anything. You do this on purpose at night, when I'm afraid and my child is being taken away. It's just the worst thing that can happen. It's leverage. I didn't do anything.
The police were on the right track, but they missed something important, something insidious, something even Marjorie herself may not actually have realized. This notion of being psychologically manipulated by another. Narcissists like Larry needed external validation. They worked on their outside because they had no inside. Marjorie told me about her pendulum theory when it came to men.
Any guy who was super anything, wealthy, attractive, charming, was probably equally as awful on the upswing. Better to find a guy in the middle as the pendulum swings low, like Jay. He was in the middle, just a nice guy. Not super rich or super attractive, but I knew he wouldn't be super awful either.
But confident, charming, disarming Larry was on the upswing of her pendulum. Some victims of narcissistic abuse become unwitting partners in crime, coerced, even threatened, behaving in ways that would once have repulsed them. Some have even described it like being in an altered state of reality. Could Marjorie, so starved for attention and the seduction of being treated as she once had, as special, as beautiful, have succumbed to Larry's predatory nature? Had she believed his pretty words, so much so that she'd adapted to his deviance, not wanting to believe he was anything other than what he represented? Psychological abuse is a crime without a crime scene, and narcissistic abuse is the most insidious form of injury because the wounds are invisible. And the victims excuse, explain, and incredibly protect their abuser, barely believing or accepting what is happening to them. Their reality is distorted, and though they see one thing, they are told what they are seeing is in fact not real. This is called gaslighting, a term coined from the 1930s play Gaslight, and it can leave a person feeling as if they're losing their mind. This kind of emotional abuse happens gradually. The predator minimizes. It's not that big a deal. That never happened. You're not recalling it correctly. You didn't see what you think you did. I never did that. You did. Narcissists like Larry live in a world where they are master deflectors, able to rationalize anything. They never take responsibility and often claim they are being persecuted. Denial is their defense. Manifests as lying, manipulation, lack of empathy, vanity, like someone who lies about his age, or says he was a certified police officer in the state of Arizona, but incredibly knows nothing about firearms. Unfortunately, psychological abuse is not a theme the law recognizes. Legally, coercive control is not considered domestic violence because there are no visible wounds. But as a post-conviction lawyer, my job is to go into the lava, so to speak, do that deep dive, that psychological autopsy to determine the cause of my client's proverbial death. That watershed moment in her life that transformed and informed the rest of her life. That moment that made her vulnerable to someone like Larry, that led her to marry multiple times, to fulfill an emptiness inside, that yearning for a child. That moment that compelled her to sacrifice everything. Her identity as a performer, her beauty to go through fertility treatments, her career as a starlet to be a supermom to Noah, her sex life to be loyal and devoted to co-parenting with her partner, her fear of being marginalized, a fear many mothers have when their reason for living, their child, begins to grow up, become more independent. Did all of those things, this past, contribute to Marjorie's silence when it came to Larry? Whether consciously or unconsciously, did her silence allow others to define her? Others like the police detectives, the prosecutor, Larry, and later, jailhouse snitches lurking to benefit from her circumstances. Did she believe, mistakenly, that silence was her survival? Not indecision, confusion, or chains. By keeping silent, did she know that disguised monsters, like Larry, were still monsters, but choose not to know? Did Marjorie, in the end, have the right to remain silent? And did her silence regarding Larry's involvement make her the focus? As her post-conviction lawyer, I'm tasked with reinvestigating what happened. But I look beyond the facts the jury heard and develop new theories, new evidence, new suspects, things that had the jury known might have changed their verdict. And I start with the end, Marjorie in prison for life. And I consider her origin story. Who is Marjorie? Most definitely not a killer. She was also not a woman the jury liked. Glamorous, beautiful, charismatic, self-sufficient, driven, fit, and spotlighted in an industry most judged unfairly. She was unrelatable, didn't act the way moms acted. The prosecution painted her as a gold digger, a user of men, an opportunist, married 7 times, used to the limelight. If she had been in a different industry, perhaps climbing the corporate ladder, would she have been so disregarded? And though nothing in Marjorie's history supported the prosecution's theory that she was a gold digger, that she murdered the man who meant everything to her for money, the jury bought it. But logic is not the same as truth. And if you start with a false premise, you end with a false premise. Yes, she married 7 times, but she also left each relationship with nothing, except tax liens and heartaches. She had opportunities to choose fame and riches, but she walked away every time. She wasn't even married to Jay. In fact, she stayed with him for 10 years, devoted to co-parenting. She spent her entire life seeking not money, not fame, not even partnership, but motherhood. Essentially, she gave up her life to give life. She made one mistake, Larry, and is now paying for that with her life. There's an interesting phenomenon called wizziati. It's a phrase coined by psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow. What you see is all there is. Not true. All there is not necessarily the whole story. It's cognitive bias, and it explains how irrational we are when making decisions and how little it actually matters to us. I want you to think about the vanishing at the Cecil Hotel syndrome. Crime junkies all jumped in and began to, quote, solve the case, when in fact it turns out it wasn't a crime at all. It was a tragic accident. Think The Staircase, with its various theories and witness issues. Crime novelist Michael Peterson is accused of killing his wife after she's found dead at the bottom of a staircase in their home. It definitely put the true in true crime. A county attorney suggested the victim's injuries were consistent with that of an owl attack. but it was never proven, and it continues to be just a wild theory. The jury was invested emotionally, and yet instructed that they must not decide the facts based on emotion. But there are psychological stakes. Everything is a story with interpretation and facts that are reconstructed depending on which side you're on. Investigators have blind spots. They might jump to conclusion, have confirmation bias. They only see what works with the hypothesis they're forming. And I submit to you that that is what happened in Marjorie's case. There's a physical crime scene and an autopsy, but there's also the psychological autopsy. There is such a thing, for instance, as a cognitive safety net, especially if you have an investment in staying in a relationship or making sure your child, the love of your life, is not taken from you. A person can reframe any given behavior to be more benign. People don't want to believe. Jeffrey Dahmer's father, for instance, did not want to believe his son was a cannibal, even when he was holding the severed head of one of his son's victims. Hey, thanks so much for listening to Crime Stands Still. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of Firefly. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your Android or Apple devices, and check out my website, carriedrobin.com, where you can find and purchase all of my true crime books and follow the latest developments in my true crime cases. Until then, stay vigilant, stay true, and stay tuned.